Wealthy man insults a janitor. Her secret life leaves him speechless. Ethan Greaves was a man who had everything. At 35, he was the CEO of a successful tech firm, a rising star in the world of business, and the owner of a penthouse that overlooked the glittering skyline of the city. His tailored suits, polished shoes, and sleek sports car were all symbols of the success he had worked tirelessly to achieve, or so he told himself. To Ethan, the world was divided into two kinds of people: those who made things happen and those who didn't. On a chilly Tuesday evening, Ethan found himself in the lobby of his company's headquarters. He had stayed late to prepare for an important investor meeting the next morning, and the building was eerily quiet. As he crossed the marble-floored lobby, he noticed a janitor mopping the far corner near the elevators. She was dressed in a simple uniform, her hair tucked under a cap, and she worked with quiet efficiency. Ethan barely glanced her way as he approached the elevator. But as he stepped onto the gleaming tile, his foot slipped slightly, leaving a faint smear on the freshly cleaned surface. The janitor noticed immediately, pausing her work to look up. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "That area was just mopped. It might still be slippery." Ethan stopped in his tracks, his irritation flaring. He turned to face her, his expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Do you think I don't know how to walk?" he snapped. "Maybe if you did your job better, people wouldn't have to worry about slipping in the first place." The janitor's expression remained calm, though a flicker of something, was it disappointment, passed through her eyes. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," she said evenly. "I'll make sure it's safe." Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever. Just stay out of the way, all right? Some of us have real work to do." The janitor said nothing more, returning to her mopping as Ethan stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors slid shut, he muttered to himself about incompetence, convinced that people like her would never understand the pressures of someone like him. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office early, determined to finalize his presentation for the investors. The meeting was crucial. It could mean the difference between securing a multi-million-dollar deal or losing everything he'd built. As he worked in his glass-walled corner office, he glanced down at the lobby and saw the janitor again, cleaning the windows with the same quiet focus she had displayed the night before. Something about her composure irritated him. She didn't seem rushed or frazzled, even as she moved from task to task. It was as if she existed in a world entirely separate from the one he inhabited, a world where deadlines and board meetings didn't matter. By lunchtime, Ethan had almost forgotten about her. He was deep into his presentation when his assistant, Claire, knocked on the door and entered with a stack of documents. "Mr. Greaves," she said, "I have the final figures for the projection slides." "Good," Ethan said without looking up. "Leave them on the desk." Claire hesitated. "There's also something else. The board recommended we invite Dr. Eliza Monroe to the investor meeting. They think her perspective could add weight to the proposal." Ethan frowned, finally looking up. "Dr. Monroe? Isn't she the one who's been doing those ridiculous think pieces on sustainable tech?" Claire nodded. "Yes, but her work has gained a lot of attention lately, and the investors are big fans. If she supports the proposal, it could make a huge difference." Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Fine. Invite her. But she better not waste my time." The investor meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m., and the boardroom was a hive of activity as Ethan and his team prepared. The investors arrived one by one, their sharp suits and expensive watches signaling their importance. Ethan greeted them with his usual charm, masking his inner anxiety. He had built his career on confidence, but this deal felt different. It was personal. At precisely 4:05, the doors opened again, and a woman entered the room. She wore a tailored blazer, her presence commanding but unpretentious. Ethan immediately recognized her as Dr. Eliza Monroe, the sustainability expert the board had insisted on inviting. But as she approached the table, Ethan froze, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. It was her. The janitor. Ethan's eyes widened as Dr. Monroe took her seat at the head of the table, setting down a sleek leather portfolio. She glanced at him briefly, her expression calm but unreadable. "Good afternoon," she said, addressing the room. "I'm Dr. Eliza Monroe." Thank you for including me in this discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing your proposal." Ethan felt a flush of heat rise to his face. He couldn't believe it. The woman he had insulted so casually, so thoughtlessly, was not just anyone. She was a renowned expert, someone whose opinion could make or break his deal. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself at a loss for words. The meeting began, and Ethan stumbled through his presentation, his usual confidence replaced by a growing sense of unease. Dr. Monroe listened intently, her expression neutral as she occasionally jotted down notes. When he finished, she leaned forward, her gaze sharp and analytical. "Mr. Greaves," she said, "your proposal is ambitious, but I have concerns about its long-term feasibility. Specifically, I'm not convinced your approach to sustainability is as robust as it needs to be." Ethan's stomach sank. He had anticipated tough questions, but not from her. Still, he forced a smile and launched into a defense of his plan, using every bit of persuasive skill he had honed over the years. But no matter what he said, Dr. Monroe remained calm, her questions cutting through his arguments with precision. By the end of the meeting, Ethan was exhausted. The investors thanked him for his presentation but made it clear they would need more time to deliberate. As they filed out of the room, Ethan stayed behind, unsure whether he should approach Dr. Monroe or let her leave without another word. Before he could decide, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Greaves," she said, "a word of advice. Success isn't just about what you build, it's about how you build it. You do well to remember that." With that, she gathered her things and left the room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. Ethan stood frozen in the empty boardroom, her words echoing in his mind. Success isn't just about what you build, it's about how you build it. He stared at the sleek conference table, its polished surface reflecting his unsettled expression. For the first time in years, he felt small, insignificant even, in a room where he had always commanded respect. As he left the boardroom and walked toward his office, his thoughts raced. Who was Dr. Eliza Monroe? How could someone like her, someone who had quietly mopped the floors just last night, also hold the power to shape the future of his company? Ethan prided himself on being able to read people, to assess their value at a glance. But this time, he had been completely wrong. Claire, his assistant, knocked gently on his office door, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Greaves? Are you all right?" Ethan waved her in, though his mind was still elsewhere. "Claire," he said, "what do you know about Dr. Monroe?" Claire tilted her head, surprised by the question. She's one of the leading experts in sustainable technology. She's written groundbreaking papers, consults for Fortune 500 companies, and even advises government initiatives. Why? Ethan hesitated, not wanting to admit the full story. No reason. She just seems different. Claire smiled faintly. She's brilliant, that's for sure. But she's also known for being hands-on. She believes in understanding things at every level. I heard she sometimes works incognito to observe how companies operate from the ground up. Maybe that's what she was doing here. The pieces clicked into place, and Ethan felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. Dr. Monroe hadn't been a janitor. She had been observing, learning about his company from a perspective he rarely considered. And he had insulted her. Ethan slumped into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Thanks, Claire. That'll be all." As she left, Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He prided himself on his intellect, his ability to strategize and outmaneuver the competition. But now he realized he had been blind to the most basic principle of leadership, respect. The following day, Ethan decided to take a different approach. Instead of retreating into his usual defenses, he resolved to face the situation head-on. He reached out to Dr. Monroe, requesting a private meeting. To his surprise, she agreed. That afternoon, they met in a quiet conference room. Dr. Monroe arrived punctually, her calm demeanor unshaken. Ethan stood as she entered, his nerves evident in the tightness of his posture. "Dr. Monroe," he began, his voice steady but careful, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me." She took a seat, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Of course, Mr. Greaves. What can I do for you?" Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology. Last night, I spoke to you in a way that was disrespectful and unacceptable. I didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. I was wrong and I'm sorry. Dr. Monroe regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Greaves. But I hope you understand that this isn't just about me. The way you treat people, regardless of their title or role, reflects who you are as a leader. Her words, though measured, hit him with the force of a hammer. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her observation. You're right, he admitted. I've been so focused on results that I've lost sight of what really matters. I want to change that. Dr. Monroe leaned back slightly, studying him. Change isn't easy, Mr. Greaves. It requires humility, effort, and a willingness to listen. Are you ready for that? I am, Ethan said, his voice firm. If you're willing to help me, I'd like to start now. Over the next several weeks, Ethan worked closely with Dr. Monroe to reevaluate his company's practices. She challenged him to consider sustainability not just as a business strategy but as a moral responsibility. Together, they examined everything from supply chain ethics to employee relations, identifying areas for improvement and implementing changes. Dr. Monroe's influence extended beyond the boardroom. One afternoon, she suggested they spend a day shadowing employees in various roles. If you want to understand your company, she said, you need to see it through the eyes of the people who keep it running. Ethan agreed, though he wasn't sure what to expect. He spent the morning in the warehouse, working alongside the staff who managed inventory and shipping. By lunchtime, his suit jacket was off, and his sleeves were rolled up as he loaded boxes onto pallets. One of the workers, a middle-aged man named Luis, chuckled as he watched Ethan struggle with a particularly heavy box. Not what you're used to, huh? He said good-naturedly. Ethan laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. Not exactly. But it's giving me a new appreciation for what you all do. Luis grinned. Good. Sometimes it feels like the people upstairs forget about us. Ethan's smile faltered, the words striking a chord. I'm trying to change that, he said quietly. As the weeks turned into months, the changes at Ethan's company became evident. Employee morale improved, and the company's new sustainability initiatives earned praise from clients and industry leaders alike. But for Ethan, the biggest change was internal. He began to see success not just as a measure of profit but as a reflection of the values he upheld. One evening, as he prepared to leave the office, he noticed Dr. Monroe in the lobby. She was speaking with a group of employees, her presence as commanding as ever. Ethan approached, waiting until she finished before addressing her. Dr. Monroe, he said, I just wanted to thank you. You've taught me more than I ever expected, and I'm grateful. She smiled, a rare warmth in her expression. You've done the hard work, Mr. Greaves. I just pointed you in the right direction. As she turned to leave, Ethan called after her. Dr. Monroe? She paused, glancing back. Yes? Why do you do it? He asked. Why go through the trouble of working undercover, of teaching people like me? Her smile widened slightly. Because change doesn't happen from the top down. It happens from within. And sometimes, people just need a little push. With that, she walked away, leaving Ethan to reflect on how much he had changed and how much further he still had to go. Months after Dr. Monroe's departure, the ripple effects of her guidance were still being felt across Ethan's company. His leadership style had undergone a profound transformation, and so had the company culture. Employees at every level noticed the changes: more collaboration, better communication, and a genuine sense of respect that had been absent before. One Friday afternoon, Ethan found himself walking through the building's common area, where employees often gathered during breaks. He paused when he overheard two junior staff members talking. Can you believe the CEO spent an entire day in the warehouse last week? One of them said, her tone filled with disbelief. And he actually helped. Like real work. I know, the other replied. It's crazy. A year ago, I wouldn't have even thought he knew we existed. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Their words reminded him of just how far he'd come, not only as a leader but as a person. Despite his progress, Ethan knew his journey wasn't over. He continued to work on improving himself, both professionally and personally. He began attending leadership seminars and workshops on empathy, humility, and sustainable business practices. He also reconnected with people he had pushed away during his climb to success, reaching out to old friends and even some former employees who had left his company because of its toxic environment. One such meeting was with a former executive named Diane, who had been one of the first to leave during the company's rapid expansion. Diane had always been outspoken about the importance of ethical leadership, but Ethan had dismissed her concerns at the time, labeling her as overly idealistic. When they met for coffee, Diane was cautious but curious. "Why now, Ethan?" she asked. "What's changed?" Ethan hesitated, then admitted, "I was wrong, Diane. About a lot of things. I let my ambition blind me to what really mattered. But someone showed me a different way, and I'm trying to make things right." Diane studied him for a moment, then nodded. "It's a start. But words are easy, Ethan. Actions are harder." "I know," he said. "And I'm not expecting forgiveness. I just want to do better." By the end of their conversation, Diane agreed to consult with Ethan on some of his new initiatives. It wasn't quite a reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. One day, while reviewing proposals in his office, Ethan received an unexpected call. The receptionist informed him that Dr. Eliza Monroe was in the lobby, requesting to speak with him. Surprised but intrigued, Ethan immediately asked her to come up. When she entered his office, she carried the same calm, unassuming demeanor that he had come to admire. But this time, there was a hint of something else in her expression. Pride, perhaps, or approval. "Dr. Monroe," Ethan said, standing to greet her. "It's good to see you. What brings you here?" "I was in town for a conference," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "And I wanted to check in, see how things were going." Ethan smiled. "Better than I could have hoped, thanks to you." She raised an eyebrow. "You give me too much credit. The real work was yours." They spent the next hour discussing the company's progress and the challenges Ethan still faced. Dr. Monroe was as direct and insightful as ever, offering suggestions and constructive criticism. But as their conversation drew to a close, she surprised him with a question. "Ethan," she said, "have you thought about what's next? Not just for your company, but for you?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you've made great strides here. But growth doesn't stop. There's a whole world out there that needs people willing to lead with integrity. Have you considered how you might contribute beyond your company?" Ethan frowned, the question sparking thoughts he hadn't considered before. "I've been so focused on fixing what's here that I haven't thought much beyond it." Dr. Monroe nodded. "Well, when you're ready, let me know. I think there's more you can do." With that, she stood, offering her hand. "It's been a pleasure, Ethan. Keep going." After Dr. Monroe left, Ethan found himself reflecting on her words. He realized that while he had made significant changes within his company, there was still a larger impact he could have. Over the next few weeks, he began exploring opportunities to extend his work into other areas. He started by joining the board of a nonprofit organization focused on sustainability and ethical business practices. The organization partnered with companies across industries to promote transparency, reduce environmental impact, and improve working conditions for employees. Ethan found the work deeply fulfilling, a chance to apply what he had learned on a broader scale. But his most significant step came a year later, when he decided to launch a scholarship program for underprivileged students pursuing degrees in environmental science and technology. The program, named after his late father, aimed to empower the next generation of innovators and leaders. At the program's launch event, Ethan stood before an audience of students, educators, and community leaders, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. As he spoke about his journey and the lessons he had learned, he couldn't help but think of Dr. Monroe and the moment that had changed everything. "Success," he said, "isn't about how much you achieve for yourself. It's about how much you give back, how much you lift others up. I've made mistakes, but I've also learned that it's never too late to change, to become the kind of leader and the kind of person you can be proud of." The audience erupted into applause, and as Ethan stepped off the stage, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. In the crowd, A familiar face watched with quiet satisfaction. Dr. Eliza Monroe didn't approach him that night. She didn't need to. She knew he had finally understood the lesson she had tried to teach him, that true leadership isn't about power or prestige. It's about humility, respect, and the courage to change. As the months passed, Ethan's scholarship program grew rapidly. Students from across the country applied, sharing their dreams of tackling climate change, developing green technologies, and creating sustainable communities. Each story Ethan read reminded him of the importance of the work he was doing. But what struck him most were the students who came from humble beginnings, those who reminded him of the janitors, warehouse workers, and unseen individuals who often went unnoticed in the corporate world. One day, while reviewing the latest batch of scholarship applications, Ethan came across a name that stopped him in his tracks: Luis Vega. The name was familiar. Luis was the warehouse worker who had joked with him about lifting boxes during his day of shadowing employees. Ethan's curiosity piqued, and he opened Luis's application. In his essay, Luis wrote about his lifelong dream of designing affordable, sustainable housing for underserved communities. He described the struggles he had faced as an immigrant and a father of two, working long hours in the warehouse while taking night classes to pursue an engineering degree. Ethan read the essay twice, struck by Luis's determination and vision. Without hesitation, he approved the scholarship, adding a personal note to the acceptance letter: "Luis, I admire your drive and resilience. Your work ethic and dreams inspire me, and I'm honored to support your journey. Let me know if there's anything more I can do to help." The scholarship recipients were invited to an annual gala to celebrate their achievements and provide a platform for networking. On the night of the event, Ethan stood near the entrance, greeting students as they arrived. When Luis walked in, dressed in a simple but well-fitted suit, Ethan felt a surge of pride. "Luis," Ethan said, extending his hand. "It's great to see you here." Luis hesitated for a moment before shaking Ethan's hand, his expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Mr. Greaves, I didn't think I'd ever see the day where I'd be here as a guest." Ethan smiled. "You've earned it. And please, call me Ethan." As the evening progressed, Ethan made it a point to introduce Luis to several influential figures in the sustainable housing industry. By the end of the night, Luis had exchanged contact information with architects, engineers, and developers who were eager to collaborate with him. Watching Luis connect with these professionals, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This, he realized, was what true leadership looked like, using his resources and influence to empower others. Ethan's transformation did not go unnoticed by his employees, many of whom had once been skeptical of his intentions. One afternoon, during a company-wide meeting, an employee named Sarah stood up to speak. Sarah had been with the company for over a decade and had witnessed its highs and lows. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady, "I just wanted to say thank you. When I first started here, I believed in this company's vision. But over the years, it felt like we lost sight of what really mattered. Seeing the changes you've made, seeing how much you've grown, has given me hope again. I'm proud to be part of this team." Her words were met with applause, and Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had spent so much time focusing on external validation, investors, clients, and industry accolades, that he had forgotten the importance of earning the trust and respect of his own team. "Thank you, Sarah," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to keep earning that trust every day." One evening, Ethan received a call from Dr. Monroe. It had been nearly a year since they last spoke, and he was surprised to hear from her. "Ethan," she said, "I've been following the progress of your scholarship program and the changes at your company. I just wanted to say I'm impressed." "Thank you, Dr. Monroe," Ethan replied. "That means a lot coming from you. I have a proposition for you," she continued. "I'm launching a new initiative, a global think tank focused on sustainability and ethical leadership. We're bringing together experts, business leaders, and changemakers from around the world to tackle some of the biggest challenges of our time. I'd like you to be part of it." Ethan was stunned. "You want me to join your think tank?" "Yes," she said simply. "You've proven that you're willing to do the work, to learn and grow. And I think your perspective could be invaluable." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'd be honored." Joining the think tank opened a new chapter in Ethan's journey. He found himself collaborating with people from diverse backgrounds: scientists, activists, policymakers, and entrepreneurs, all united by a common goal. The experience challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated, forcing him to confront his own assumptions and expand his understanding of what true sustainability and ethical leadership entailed. One of the most impactful projects Ethan worked on was a partnership with developing countries to create sustainable infrastructure. During a visit to a small village in South America, he met with local leaders who shared their vision for a self-sufficient community powered by renewable energy. As Ethan listened to their plans, he was reminded of Luis and his dream of building affordable housing. He realized that the same principles applied here, lifting people up by giving them the tools and resources to succeed. The project was a success, and Ethan returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. He began integrating what he had learned into his company's operations, ensuring that every decision was aligned with the principles of equity, sustainability, and respect. Years later, Ethan stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, delivering a keynote speech at an international conference on ethical leadership. As he looked out at the audience, he spotted familiar faces: Luis, now a successful architect; Sarah, who had been promoted to a leadership role within the company; and even Dr. Monroe, sitting near the front, her expression one of quiet pride. Change, Ethan began, is never easy. It requires humility, accountability, and the courage to admit when you've been wrong. I've made my share of mistakes, but those mistakes taught me the most important lesson of all: true success isn't measured by what you achieve for yourself, it's measured by the impact you have on others. The audience erupted into applause, and as Ethan stepped off the stage, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. His journey had been far from perfect, but it had brought him to a place where he could finally make a difference. Dr. Monroe approached him, her smile warm. "You've come a long way, Ethan." He nodded, his voice steady. "Thanks to you." As Ethan mingled with the audience after his keynote speech, he couldn't help but notice the diverse range of people drawn to the event. Activists, students, scientists, and business leaders approached him to share their thoughts and gratitude. For Ethan, it was a humbling experience. The man who once measured his success by the size of his bank account now found meaning in conversations, in connections, in the collective drive for positive change. One interaction that stood out was with a young woman named Amina, a recent college graduate from Kenya. She had traveled halfway across the world to attend the conference and was eager to discuss a project she was spearheading in her community: a solar-powered water filtration system that could provide clean drinking water to thousands. "I've been following your work with the think tank," Amina said, her excitement shining through her voice. "Your approach to integrating sustainability with ethical leadership is what inspired me to take action in my village." Ethan was moved. Amina's passion reminded him of Luis and so many others he had encountered on his journey. "Your project sounds incredible," he said. "If there's any way I can help, let me know." Amina smiled. "Actually, I was hoping you might consider collaborating. With the resources and expertise from your think tank, we could expand this project to neighboring villages." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Let's set up a meeting and figure out how to make this happen." The collaboration with Amina became one of the most fulfilling projects of Ethan's career. Over the next year, they worked together to secure funding, develop the technology, and train local engineers to maintain the filtration systems. The project not only improved access to clean water but also created jobs and empowered communities to take ownership of their resources. During a visit to Amina's village to inaugurate the first completed system, Ethan was struck by the sense of pride and joy radiating from the people. Children laughed as they filled their bottles with clean water for the first time, and elders expressed their gratitude in heartfelt speeches. Ethan stood beside Amina, watching the scene unfold, and felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. "This is what it's all about," Amina said quietly, her gaze on the children. "Making life better for others?" Ethan nodded. "You're right. And it's a lesson I wish I'd learned sooner." Back at his company, Ethan continued to build on the momentum of his transformation. He launched a program to offer internships and mentorship opportunities to students from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring that the next generation of leaders would reflect the diversity and creativity of the world they were shaping. One of the interns, a young man named Alex, quickly caught Ethan's attention. Alex was brilliant but reserved, his ideas often hidden behind a shy demeanor. During a brainstorming session, Ethan noticed Alex hesitating to speak up. "Alex," Ethan said gently, "what's on your mind?" Alex looked around nervously before finally sharing his idea, a revolutionary approach to reducing waste in the company's supply chain. As he explained his concept, the room fell silent, the other employees clearly impressed. When Alex finished, Ethan smiled. "That's an incredible idea, Alex. Let's explore it further and see how we can implement it." The experience was a turning point for Alex, who later credited Ethan's encouragement as the moment that gave him the confidence to pursue his dreams. For Ethan, it was a reminder of the power of leadership rooted in empathy and support. One evening, Ethan received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Luis, who had since become a prominent architect and advocate for sustainable housing. "Ethan, I wanted to take a moment to thank you. The scholarship you offered me didn't just change my life. It changed the lives of my family and the communities I now serve. Your belief in me gave me the courage to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. I hope you know the impact you've had, not just on me but on so many others. With gratitude, Luis." Ethan read the letter twice, his chest tightening with emotion. He carefully placed it in his desk drawer, alongside other mementos from his journey, a reminder of why he had chosen this path and the lives he had touched along the way. Dr. Monroe remained a constant presence in Ethan's life, both as a mentor and a friend. They often collaborated on projects through the think tank, and their shared passion for creating meaningful change deepened their bond. One evening, during a quiet dinner after a particularly grueling conference, Dr. Monroe shared a piece of advice that stayed with Ethan. "True leadership," she said, "isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about lifting others into it. The best leaders don't just build legacies, they build people." Ethan nodded, letting her words sink in. "I've learned that from watching you," he admitted. "You saw potential in me when I didn't even see it in myself." Dr. Monroe smiled. "And now you're doing the same for others. That's how we change the world, one person at a time." Years later, Ethan found himself once again standing on a stage, this time at the United Nations, addressing a global audience about the intersection of sustainability and ethical leadership. As he spoke about the initiatives he had championed and the lessons he had learned, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the janitor he had dismissed, the lessons she had taught him, and the countless lives that had been touched as a result. He thought of Luis, Amina, Alex, and the many others who had inspired him to keep growing, to keep striving for something greater. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the accolades, but for the opportunity to make a difference. He knew his work was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. In the front row, Dr. Monroe watched with quiet pride. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. And now, she saw the man he had become. A leader, a change maker, and most importantly, someone who had learned to lead with his heart. As Ethan stepped off the stage at the United Nations, he was greeted by a rush of handshakes and words of encouragement. Among the crowd were familiar faces, colleagues, collaborators, and students whose lives he had impacted. But one person stood quietly at the back, waiting for the throng to disperse. It was Luis. "Luis," Ethan exclaimed, walking toward him with genuine excitement. "What are you doing here?" Luis smiled, holding up a badge. "I'm part of a panel tomorrow on sustainable housing development. When I heard you'd be speaking today, I knew I had to come." Ethan grinned. "I'm glad you did. How's everything going? Last I heard, your project in the Southwest was making waves." Luis nodded enthusiastically. "It's been incredible. We've completed 200 homes, all powered by solar energy, and we're starting construction on a community center next month. Honestly, I owe so much of it to you and that scholarship." Ethan shook his head, his voice earnest. "You owe it to yourself, Lu. You had the vision and the determination. I just gave you a little push." Luis chuckled. "Maybe, but you've taught me something important, that leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about creating opportunities for people to thrive. Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Conversations like these reminded him that the seeds he had planted were bearing fruit, not just in projects, but in people. Later that evening, as Ethan sat in his hotel room reflecting on the day, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Amina, who had recently expanded her water filtration project to include agricultural irrigation systems. Ethan, I just wanted to share some exciting news. The irrigation system we've been working on is now operational, and it's already helping local farmers double their crop yields. None of this would have been possible without your support. Thank you for believing in me and my community. Amina. Ethan stared at the message, a smile tugging at his lips. He replied immediately, congratulating her and expressing his pride in her achievements. Amina's success felt like a shared victory, a testament to the power of collaboration and trust. As he set his phone down, Ethan's thoughts turned to Dr. Monroe. He hadn't spoken to her since the UN speech, but her presence always seemed to linger in his life, guiding him even when she wasn't physically there. Deciding to reach out, he dialed her number. "Ethan," she answered after the second ring, her voice as composed as ever. "I was just thinking about you. Wonderful job today. You've come so far." "Thanks to you," Ethan replied. "I wouldn't be here without your guidance." Dr. Monroe chuckled softly. "You give me too much credit. You've done the hard work. So what's next?" Ethan paused, her questions sparking a familiar sense of introspection. "I've been thinking about scaling our scholarship program globally," he said. "There's so much untapped potential in communities around the world, and I want to help more people like Luis and Amina realize their dreams." Dr. Monroe's tone was approving. "That's an ambitious goal, Ethan. But I think you're ready for it. Let me know how I can help." Over the next 2 years, Ethan poured his energy into expanding the scholarship program, now rebranded as the Global Opportunity Initiative. The initiative partnered with universities, nonprofits, and local leaders to identify talented individuals from underserved communities and provide them with the resources they needed to succeed. The first cohort of global scholars was an inspiring group, hailing from over 20 countries. Ethan personally met with each of them during an orientation event, taking the time to hear their stories and understand their goals. One scholar, a young woman named Sofia from Argentina, shared her vision of creating biodegradable packaging solutions to combat plastic pollution. Ethan was captivated by her passion and ingenuity. "Sofia," he said, "your work could change the world. Let's make sure you have everything you need to make it happen." Sofia beamed, her confidence growing under his encouragement. It was moments like these that reminded Ethan of the profound impact his work could have, not just on individual lives, but on the future of the planet. Meanwhile, Ethan's own company had become a model of sustainable and ethical practices. Employees often cited the transformation as the reason they stayed, and clients praised the company's commitment to transparency and responsibility. One day, during an internal meeting, Sarah, now a senior executive, suggested an idea that Ethan immediately embraced: hosting an annual Innovation for Impact Summit. The summit would bring together leaders, innovators, and changemakers from around the world to share ideas and collaborate on solutions to pressing global challenges. Ethan loved the concept and quickly set the wheels in motion. The first summit, held in his company's headquarters, was a resounding success. Panels on renewable energy, ethical AI, and community-driven development sparked lively discussions and forged new partnerships. Luis presented his latest housing project, Amina shared updates on her irrigation systems, and Sofia unveiled a prototype of her biodegradable packaging. As Ethan watched the collaborations unfold, he felt a profound sense of pride, not in himself, but in the people around him. They were the true heroes of this story, and he was honored to play a role in supporting them. By the time Ethan turned 50, his life looked completely different from the one he had envisioned in his younger years. The flashy cars and penthouse apartments no longer held the same appeal. Instead, his happiness came from the relationships he had built, the lives he had touched, and the legacy he was creating. One afternoon, as he walked through his company's bustling offices, he spotted a janitor wiping down a glass partition. The scene brought him back to that fateful day when he had first encountered Dr. Monroe. Smiling, Ethan approached the janitor. "Hi there," he said warmly. "How's your day going?" The janitor looked up, surprised but appreciative of the friendly tone. "It's going well, sir. Thanks for asking." Ethan nodded. "Thank you for everything you do. This place wouldn't run without you." The janitor smiled and Ethan walked away, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He had come full circle, but this time, he understood the value of every person in the room. Ethan's life had indeed come full circle, but the journey was far from over. As he continued to grow his initiatives and expand his influence in global sustainability, he remained committed to the core values that Dr. Monroe had helped instill in him: respect, humility, and service. One day, Ethan received an invitation to speak at a university commencement ceremony. The school was one of the partners in his Global Opportunity Initiative, and the graduating class included several scholarship recipients. He immediately accepted, eager to address a new generation of changemakers. When the day arrived, Ethan stood on the stage before thousands of graduates and their families. The sun shone brightly, and the energy in the air was palpable. As he began his speech, he shared stories from his life, highlighting the moments that had shaped him. "I used to think success was measured in wealth and status," he said. "But I learned, often the hard way, that true success is about the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind. Each of you has the power to create change, not just for yourself, but for the world. Use that power wisely." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ethan smiled, his heart full. After the ceremony, a line of graduates formed to thank him, share their aspirations, and seek advice. Among them was Sophia, the young scholar from Argentina. "Mr. Greaves," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "I wanted to show you something." She handed him a small box containing a sample of her biodegradable packaging. "This is the first batch we've manufactured. It's being tested by a major retailer next month." Ethan examined the packaging, marveling at its simplicity and innovation. "This is incredible, Sophia. I'm so proud of you." Her eyes sparkled. "I couldn't have done it without the scholarship. Thank you for believing in me." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You earned this, Sophia. And I can't wait to see what you achieve next." As the years went by, Ethan's reputation as a leader and changemaker continued to grow. He was invited to join advisory boards for global organizations, consulted on sustainability policies for governments, and even co-authored a book with Dr. Monroe titled Leading with Purpose: A Blueprint for Ethical Leadership. The book became a bestseller, praised for its practical advice and inspiring stories. In it, Ethan shared his journey, including the pivotal moment when he first met Dr. Monroe as a janitor in his company's lobby. He wrote candidly about his mistakes, his transformation, and the people who had helped him along the way. The book's release sparked widespread conversations about the importance of ethical leadership, and it became required reading in business schools and leadership programs worldwide. Ethan often received letters from readers who were inspired by his story to reflect on their own lives and make meaningful changes. One day, Ethan received a surprising email. It was from a young entrepreneur named Daniel, who had recently launched a startup focused on renewable energy solutions. Daniel explained that he had been following Ethan's work for years and had modeled his company's values on the principles outlined in Leading with Purpose. "I'd be honored if you would mentor me," Daniel wrote. "Your guidance could make all the difference as I navigate the challenges of building a business that stays true to its mission." Ethan was deeply moved. He agreed to meet with Daniel, and the two quickly developed a strong rapport. As Ethan guided Daniel through the ups and downs of running a purpose-driven company, he saw echoes of his younger self, ambitious, determined, but still learning what it meant to lead with integrity. Mentoring Daniel became one of the most rewarding experiences of Ethan's life. He saw firsthand how his story was influencing the next generation, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond anything he had imagined. As Ethan approached his 60s, he began to think about the future, not just his own, but the legacy he would leave behind. He knew the work he had started needed to outlive him, to continue growing and evolving long after he was gone. He convened a meeting with the leaders of his initiatives, including Luis, Amina, and Sophia, as well as younger leaders like Daniel. Together, They discussed how to ensure the sustainability of their efforts, exploring ways to empower the next wave of changemakers. What we've built isn't just about us, Ethan said during the meeting. It's about creating systems and communities that can thrive without us. That's how we ensure the work continues. The group agreed to establish a foundation, pooling their resources and expertise to create a global network dedicated to sustainability, education, and ethical leadership. The foundation, named the Horizon Initiative, launched with an ambitious goal to address the world's most pressing challenges by fostering collaboration across sectors and generations. The launch event for the Horizon Initiative was held in a grand hall filled with leaders, activists, and visionaries from around the world. As Ethan stood on stage to deliver the opening address, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. "Every journey begins with a single step," he said. "Mine began with a mistake, an insult born of ignorance. But that moment led me here, to this room, surrounded by people who inspire me every day. Together, we have the power to create a better world. Let's not waste it." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, their applause echoing through the hall. For Ethan, it was a moment of closure, not an end, but the culmination of everything he had worked toward. Years later, Ethan retired from his day-to-day responsibilities but remained actively involved in mentoring and advocating for sustainability. He often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point, grateful for the lessons he had learned and the people who had shaped his life. Dr. Monroe, now a lifelong friend, once said to him during one of their regular dinners, "You've built something extraordinary, Ethan. But what I'm most proud of is the man you've become." Ethan smiled, raising his glass. "I had a great teacher." As they toasted to the future, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had been imperfect, full of missteps and hard lessons, but it had led him to a life of purpose and connection. And that, he knew, was the true measure of success.